Welcome to Art Crash with artists Fee Marks and Paula Telizyn, where we talk about having an art business, being an artist, being a woman artist in 2026, and even ideas around art. Hello, Fee.
Hello, Paula.
So today we were having an interesting discussion about hobby artists versus professional artists versus what it means to sell out as an artist, and even how your focus in making your artwork can impact how you communicate and all of those complicated things. So we're going to touch on this. But before we do that, I think Fee and I both want to make it clear that there is no better or worse or hierarchy in this discussion. A hobby artist is not any less than a professional artist or a gallery artist or anything else. We're just talking
Exactly.
about ideas.
Yeah, it's not a reflection of your skill or your creativity because when we were just talking, I was saying that the only difference is you are either selling your art or you're not selling your art. You're thinking of your collector or you're thinking of yourself, which both of those are valid. But unless we understand that there is a difference, then it is very hard to run a business if you are creating art for yourself and hoping that other people will agree with you.
So let's roll this back because you started our off recording discussion with the history of the word hobby. So we're going to, it'll be fast. Don't run away. But go ahead, Fee, and share that with us.
Yeah, it's got me thinking about the word hobby because I have always struggled with the word hobby. When people say, oh, on your CV, you should put your hobbies. And I always used to think, well, I don't really have any hobbies. And then I began to think, what does the word hobby mean? Is it a word that's used across cultures? Or is it something that is particular to the Western world? And when I looked at it, the word comes from, this is in the UK, in the English language. The word comes from hobby horse, which, as you know, is a child's toy with a horse's head and a stick that children used to play with. And it was about people, and I think you can still say people, oh no, we say get on your high horse, or there are certain expressions around that, but it was when somebody wanted to talk a lot about something that they were interested in or passionate about, it was referred to as getting on their hobby horse. From that, hobbies came. Now, this is where I think language got a bit muddled because, in my mind, there is a difference between what you are passionate about and what a pastime is. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. But that's what it has become in the English language. There are equivalent words in other cultures, but they slightly mean slightly different things, which is to do with passions, things that you like to talk about. All that is right, but whether it is just something that you do in your spare time, because as I was saying to Paula, again, that is a privilege of a certain percentage of people in the world. If you're working 6.5 days a week and you're working 12-hour days, you have no time to think, let alone do a pastime or a hobby. So again, I think it's something that's come from the privilege of upper and middle classes.
If you are spending your days doing transactional work, so work for money, you need something to express yourself. Otherwise, you become the equivalent of a shell of a human. And that has gone on for a long time, especially with the Industrial Revolution, where people did work those 6.5 days and got their mornings off at Christmas or whatever, and that's it.
So it's still so relevant today because we all know people, and I would say, now I could be wrong, but it feels to me in the UK particularly that this is the majority. They go to work, they work hard, but they are not passionate about their work. And that is often something that's said to artists, oh, you're so lucky that you can do your passion as a job. And they are continually looking forward, looking ahead to the next holiday, the next festival, when they don't have to go to work. And then they just have to go back. So it's all a means to an end. And I have always thought if we look at what young children are passionate about, we could quite easily get them much more engaged in their own learning, become lifelong learners, and actually look at those assets that those everybody has. Everybody has different interests and things, and gear that so that their work, when they need paid work, ties in with those passions.
One of the ideas I used when I was raising my kids was to see where their strengths were and their interests were, and then help them lean into them. Because my idea was that teenagers cope better with the teenage years when they understand a bit more about themselves and have something they're proud of that they're good at. And I know that it's not, like, kind of the normal sort of attitude towards teenagers. Usually parents are like, watch them search their electronics, have curfews and whatever, and for me, it was watch them, see what they enjoy, figure out how we can lean into that, and maybe give them the chance to create careers or jobs or whatever that they're interested in. So I'll use my middle son as an example. He was always inclined to building things, loved video games and everything else, loved putting stuff together in our workshop, whether it was just like nailing sticks together or gluing things or whatever. And as he went through high school, I was like, how do we get him into it? I put him in an art program. He didn't enjoy it because he wanted to do his own thing. Put him in tech, and we discovered he loves welding, loves the hell out of welding. Welding, he would eat, breathe, and sleep it given the chance. And now he works as a welder and loves it. A job that a lot of people might think is just a job, but for him, it includes his love of metal, love of being dirty, something he's loved since kindergarten or earlier, and just knowing, like, he's built things, and when he's frustrated, he can hammer the shit out of some metal and get the frustration out, but he loves everything about it, and that's how you turn what could be I don't know, a job into a passion or a passion into a job, right? But a lot of people don't have that opportunity. They're like, "Okay, I'm gonna go do HR. I'm gonna be an insurance person because they earn a lot of money or whatever." Like, they don't have that desire underneath. But I wanna focus this more towards art, right? Because if your art is your hobby versus your art being your profession, you still have an inclination to being creative, and you still have this desire to make your work. But the difference is, as P said earlier, is the focus.
Which is huge, which is absolutely huge. And we talk about this when we hear so many artists saying, "Oh, I just hate marketing. I hate the idea of pushing myself, putting my art out there." And we've talked about how if you are thinking of your client and what they are gaining from your art, then you're gearing to your ideal avatar, your ICA. And that is the difference. But that doesn't mean at the cost of what you want to paint. There is a way to combine the two. So I think a lot of people, when they do their market research or they look at what other people are selling and think, oh, look, so and so landscape art seems to sell really well, or pet portraits seem to sell really well. I will do that. I'm good at art and I will do that. Might not be my passion, but that's a good compromise. But then they find that they're not selling as well as the person they were aspiring to be because it's not their passion. Whereas if you are passionate about landscapes and the world and you want to show the connection between the elements and the world that we live in and ourselves, suddenly that is the connection. It's not about the landscape, it's about the emotion. It's about how you feel and how you make other people feel. It's not about, I like nature, so other people like nature. You have to push it to an emotional connection.
Okay, so the difference then between somebody who's a hobby artist, so somebody who's creating art for themselves and their pleasure and their passion, and a professional artist who has made that leap not to selling their art, because I mean, hobby artists can still sell their art and call themselves professional, but who's made the leap to understand that their art is about the communication and about what their ideal collector, what I call when I teach artists, ICA, ideal collector avatar, is yearning for and looking for. It's that turning your desire to create art and communicate from inside of you to outside, to allowing people to come in and making it a more invitational process. One of the things I absolutely, absolutely detest, and I see it fairly regularly from artists, is they will say, art is my therapy. And these are the same artists who are trying to sell art. And that absolutely will turn people off, not because they don't understand that when you work in something that you're passionate about makes you feel better, it makes maybe you feel connected and good and whatever, but it immediately puts this barrier because therapy is inherently private. It's a personal journey that you take with a trained professional to help you out.
Exactly. And we all know that the arts are great for therapeutic purposes because it's a different way of communicating. But that is something completely different from painting to running a small business. You cannot run a small business on your therapy.
Yes.
They're at loggerheads with each other because you're going inward instead of going outward.
So understanding then when you if you are a professional artist or you desire to be a professional artist, then you need to speak about your art in a way that invites the viewers and the audience in, that lets them feel like they can have a journey with your work rather than just saying, I love this oak tree. This oak tree is the best. When I was growing up, this oak tree was by my house and it feels like it represents my life. That's a very internal or self-directed description. Whereas if you think about, explaining it in a way that allows people in, "I grew up next to this oak tree. Did you have a favorite tree as well? Trees provide us with so much benefit, more than we can see. Check out how squirrel families have lived in it," or whatever. Like, you're inviting people in. It doesn't just become I, me. It becomes, "Come in and maybe put your memories in this too, and see this painting or photograph or sculpture as a representation of something that you experienced as well." That's sort of the difference.
It's the emotional engagement between the oak tree and yourself, and that's what is common. That's the commonality, is that oak tree felt familiar, it felt like a member of your family, you felt safe and secure around that oak tree. Other people will have those feelings, not about the same oak tree, but maybe about a different tree or something else. And they go, yes, oh, I never really thought of it like that. I just knew I loved this tree. And it's so solid and it's so substantial, but it is the emotional side.
Mhm. Exactly. It's thinking about where your art fits in context outside of your journey with the art. Because as artists, regardless of how we create and who we create for, we have a personal journey with our art. We know it from the idea to the execution when maybe it didn't look very good in between, and we can see when it's done where maybe it fell short of our idea or aspiration, or maybe it exceeded it. But we have that personal journey that nobody else can have with our art. It's when we're finished with it, are we allowing other people to have their own personal journey, to have that relationship with our arts? That comes into how we put it into context. And so there is that marked difference between a hobby artist and a professional artist in that we do invite people in. But there's an argument I've seen online from artists who don't desire to sell their art professionally necessarily. They want to be in galleries, they want to be in shows, but they want to be the sort of academic foo-foo type artists. And I have seen these arguments. I'm not just making assumptions out of thin air. They say that the act of selling and thinking about your collector or potential collector actually changes your art. It changes how you produce your art because you become aware of what you might need to do in order to make the art more saleable. Therefore, it's a negative thing. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Which is crazy, really. But actually, again, it comes from the privilege. Art, painting used to be something, but like one of the very few things that women were allowed to do. It was seen as a pastime that was acceptable for women to keep them quiet, demure, to fit into that sort of Victorian upper class image of what women should, in inverted commas, be. And everything then gets muddled. And yet, there were women who were painting for a living. And if you think, when you look in a gallery at past paintings, portraits are probably go back the furthest in time. And portraits often tended to be for clients. They weren't painting these pictures of these people because they found them interesting. But what the artist would do is, by being paid, and they knew that they had to get those filters on, a lot of the time. They had to make the sitter feel like they are the most beautiful person in the world, and what was fitting into the style and the belief of beauty of the time. So they knew they had to flatter the client, but I'm sure they would also go, yeah, but this bit about them is really, really interesting. And that would be what drove them on. So it wouldn't just be the money, because they would still have to look for the soul of that person. They would still, in order to create a great portrait. I mean, I think we've talked a bit about the Mona Lisa and being an enigma because people don't know who she is. So they create stories about her. But when she was painted, she was a real person. And there was a story, and there was a story that the artist wanted to tell you about that person.
In science, we know that the act of observing can change the behavior of quantum particles. I'm not a quantum scientist. I'm certainly not going to put pseudoscience into place here, but on a very high level, we know that the act of observing changes the action of certain particles. So I would take that a step further and say the act of being aware that you're being paid, that somebody's opinion needs to factor in because they're paying you, or you intend to be paid, does affect the outcome of your art. But I'm not saying it's a bad thing because we are not islands. We are part of a larger whole. And I do remember in the sort of late 1990s, early 2000s, the thing online, might have been early to mid 2000s, especially on Tumblr. People would post things like, I feel so alone. I feel like nobody gets me. I don't belong anywhere. That's not an attitude you see a lot now. To think that people now sort of understand we're part of a larger whole. We are a part of a collective. So, how can you create art in a vacuum? If you are part of a larger collective. We're influenced by our experiences. We're influenced by the people who are in authority over us when we were younger. We're influenced by trying to fit in, whether we say we want to or not. We all have severe training around fitting in. So you can't say that it is a bad thing to be aware of where your art might end up or to create in a way that might impact your income.
I think you have to be clear. And if you are using it for your therapy, that's fine.
Mhm.
Don't then go, and now I'm going to try and sell it and be surprised when people don't buy it. And I think there is a lot of that haphazardness in the art business and the art world because it's the not understanding. I was talking to somebody, an artist, the other day who said, oh, I used to be semi professional. I didn't go into what that meant. But they said, oh, I burnt myself out because I was traveling all over the country. And immediately I thought, so his perception of being an artist was continually on the move, going to art fairs, art festivals, setting up your stall and selling your art. That was what they believed was the way that you sold art. Well, if you don't go any deeper than that, it will be soul destroying. I mean, he said he ended up being burnt out. I mean, I didn't go into it because it's not very helpful to say, well, actually, if you'd done some more work on yourself and your art and more thinking, then you might have had more light bulb and more passion about it. It's not just we've said this over and over again about art is not a market stall, and I know that has become in 2026 the way that most people think you sell your art is at art fairs. There are galleries, but not as many people go into galleries and buy art as they do when they're out for the day and they are walking around an art fair and they go, oh, I'll buy this. And that's why the price of the art is often really, really low, because people buying art on a whim very rarely happens because of the cost and the time it takes to produce. So all these things that we talk about on the podcast, and I know, and thank you to all the listeners who've said about how thought provoking it is, because this is a time, just by choosing to listen to this podcast, you are spending time reflecting on your own practice. You might not even be an artist, but you might enjoy the podcast, but reflect on what you do and how you do it and your approach to it. I think it goes across the board. It's a really, really important. And as a teacher, that was something that I was taught when I was training. It is important. And people find it a real chore to write an evaluation, but an evaluation is just time to reflect. You shouldn't have to share it with anybody, but it should inform your practice. And that's exactly the same for whatever you do, be you an artist, be you not, be you a writer, dancer, whatever. That self-reflection is really, really important. And that does not mean beating yourself up and giving yourself a hard time. We talk about being kind to yourself. It's not about battering yourself and saying, oh, I should have done this, I should have done the other. I'm not talking about self-reflection in that way. Self-reflection in the way of, okay, how can I move my business on? What are the best ways that I can go forward with my business in order to make this successful? You cannot stand still. Reflection is vital. Self-reflection and reflection of your business.
And being honest with what you're actually doing in your business to move your business forward to sell more art. One of the trends I've seen online lately, and I'm pretty sure that these people genuinely are feeling these emotions, but I think it's a really negative thing, is I'm thinking last night when I was scrolling TikTok as one does, I came across an artist who was saying she quit her job, she started selling art, it was doing really well, but the first 3 months of this year have been tough. And so, I guess she's never run a business before because she'd understand that business is cyclical. You can't spend everything that you get in because you need to set stuff aside so when you do have slow months, you're still good, ideally, ideally. But she was on TikTok crying because now she has to go get a job because she's not selling enough art. So people in her audience were like, "No, no, no, let's check out your art, see how good it is." And so she started selling because she was crying. Do you want to sell your art because people are feeling sorry for you? And I mentioned this in one of the articles I wrote a couple of years back. I'd come across this woman who would sell her art in the exact same way. She would post these photos of her art half in shadow, very terrible photos of whatever paintings it was. And then she'd be like, it's my son's birthday next week and I only have $20. I need to buy him a cake and some presents. So people would start buying her art because they want her son to have a birthday. They weren't buying her art because they connected with it, because they loved it. It was charity. It was, I feel sorry for you. This will make me feel like I've done good in the world, so I feel good about myself. None of the pieces of art that were made factored into that decision. It was for the person who donated money to get their art, it was, I need to feel good about myself. And for the person who was supposedly trying to sell art, it was, I'm going to use whatever tactic works to get people to give me money. They didn't care about the fact that people weren't buying the art. They were buying the feeling good feeling. So it's really important for artists who want to make money from their art to be aware of a few things. Number one, art sales are cyclical, like retail sales are. Right after Christmas season, when people get their credit card bills, they're less likely to buy art. Figure out how to deal with it because there are ups and downs in every season. Number two is decide what you want or why you want people to buy your art. Do you want them to buy it because they feel sorry for you? Or do you want them to buy it because they connect with your art, love your work, and want more of that in their space, that energy, those ideas, that feeling they get? You have to decide. And number three is if you're going to be professional, you need to think about those people when you're creating your work. And yes, it will have an influence on your work, but that's not a bad thing because you're thinking outside of your own head. You're thinking about experiences that aren't necessarily your own. And one of the beauties of being human is to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Now, this doesn't work if you're a psychopath and have no empathy and are an arse, but it works if you're just your typical human, where you can say, actually, I know that this experience has happened to somebody, and I can feel their joy or their sadness or their whatever you're creating art from. I'm going to express it through the art and talk about it. And so these things are all really important when you're considering about buying art. A hobby artist, again, which is not a bad thing, and not a bad place to be, they won't do that extra work. And their art may or may not be better or worse for it. I'm not judging. But that depth of work, that intentionality behind what you're saying and how you're saying it, and the awareness of the people around you, and the fact that we belong to this web or it's not really a chain because we're not one long line, but we belong to this large mass of humanity. It's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, you just made me think as well. I have heard people say, and they say it, I think, from a good place. But I have always gone, oh, is the clients that say, I like to support local artists. I like to support artists because that is still smacking to me a bit about the charity. I know you struggle. I know you're having issues, and that's why I'd rather do it. Buy something off you, and I will feel better, which is exactly the same as what you were saying before. I've always said the best reaction you can have from somebody looking at your art is to move them to tears, be them tears of joy, tears of memory, whatever. In my mind, crying doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's about the emotional connection. And when that happens, I think it's the most powerful thing because often the person has to really think hard about why they've been moved to tears. They often don't know. And they have to go away and think, well, why did that painting, why was it so powerful? To me, as a professional artist, that is the best reaction. Obviously, if they buy it as well. But they have connected. An artist that I know has said, I've stopped giving titles to my artwork because I want the viewer to make that decision. Now that's taking it to the far too much of the extreme because you must put titles on your work. Your titles show you that you care, in my mind, that you care, that you want to. All of this is communication, communication, communication. If you're not even communicating what the original idea of your painting is or was, people are going to struggle to connect with it.
That puts the idea that we assume that people are inherently creative when we live in a culture right now in the West. So this happens in Canada, it happens in the US, it happens in the UK and Australia and everywhere else, that there is a creative nurturing that happens. And it doesn't because
Yeah.
governments, especially the governments in power for the last several, well, at least 2 or 3 decades, have been focused on get a job, get a job, get a job. There's no job in creativity. They've just decided you need to be in science or engineering or technology or math to get a
They
job.
see you as a cog.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you don't nurture that creativity, how are you going to get adults who can come up with context or ideas for titles or understand why they feel connected? Because they won't. They haven't exercised that muscle. And unfortunately, it's happening at a younger and younger age where one of my friends teaches art to who she calls the kindies and the grade knots. And all the little kids, and she's saying they're coming in and they've never imagined. They're given an iPad and, technology to take in whatever to be entertained, but they don't know what to do if you hand them 2 sticks and a rock. They have no idea. And so you get those kids growing up. Lucky for them, they're going through our art program, so they get to nurture that creativity for several years. But a lot of people don't have that. So you become an adult who can't see how things can be. They don't have that muscle exercised. It's atrophied, absolutely. So we need to give context now more than ever to people looking at our art. We need to explain things more. And I think we need to let people know as professionals what's going on. That's why houses are staged now when they never were 30 years ago, because people can't imagine their furniture in a house that somebody else's stuff is in. And so it's changed house buying. We can also say like HGTV and all the television house selling shows have changed things too, absolutely. But the underlying thing is that people cannot imagine. And I've typically worked with clients who I need to spoon feed things to when I've done animations or graphic design or content for their businesses. I've had to explain things to them so they understand what's going on. Because even though they're running these businesses that need that content, they don't have the ability to imagine because that muscle is gone.
And without the creativity muscle being nurtured, you stop thinking, you stop questioning, you just accept the status quo. And we need to be continually questioning what's going on around us and analyzing, is this logical? Is this make sense? Can we see what are the consequences of this? And that all comes from the creativity muscle. So it's not, as the curriculum has been sold, that it's painting and drawing and it is a pastime. Back to the pastime hobby. It is vital. It is a vital part of human existence.
Yeah. And I think we're gonna wrap this episode up because we could keep going and going and going on this. We're gonna wrap this episode up with the ideas that we've shared. Do you consider yourself to be a hobby artist, a professional artist, a foo-foo academic type artist, or something else? Has this maybe changed the way that you think about your work? Or have you considered the ideas and thought, Amphi and Paula are full of shit. Let's just move on. So it's
Nobody will think that.
nobody will think that, but I'm throwing all the ideas out. So put in the comments. We do read the comments. We actually get the comments. We always respond nicely. And so feel free to share. And of course, like, subscribe, follow us, share our episodes with your followers, and look out for new episodes every week. You can listen to us on Audible, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and more. Wherever your favorite podcast episodes are, you can also follow us on YouTube, and we will see you in the next episode.